Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is Heidi Schneider. I'm your fellow congregant, and I'm also the chair of the Masorti Foundation for Conservative Judaism in Israel. And I'm here today to welcome you to Masorti Shabbat at Adath Yeshurun. On Masorti Shabbat, we have a number of different things that you can take a look at on the Adath Yeshurun website. We have 2 different videos about Masorti Shabbat. I've got a PowerPoint of pictures about the things that I've talked about today and information about the movement in visual form. We have written brochures about Masorti information if you'd like to download it. And we have a link to the global gathering for healing between Israel and the United States, sponsored by USCJ and the Masorti movement. That's going to take place on Sunday at 11 a.m. if you want to join us. It will be a truly beautiful event, 30 minutes. There will be a link also on the Adath Yeshurun website, or you can find it, I think, on Facebook Live. Please check all of these out. I urge you to take a look. In this video, I wanted to talk about our trip to Magen Avraham in Omer about a month ago, which seems more like a lifetime at this point. It was myself, the Hazan, Kathy Orkin-Askow, and Risa Kessler, who headed to Magen Avraham a month ago. We had a day in the life. It happened to be a Shabbat day in the life of the congregation. We had home hospitality with our friends in Omer. We were fed delicious food, and I have an amazing recipe for farro chickpea leek salad. If you would like it, contact me. I will get it to you. This might be a good after Pesach recipe to give a try. We enjoyed their hospitality from Kabbalat Shabbat until Havdalah. Now, why did the 4 of us head to Magen Avraham? Well, it's because our congregation has a really long connection with Magen Avraham in Omer. We, first of all, have supported their rabbinic intern program for many, many years. This program was the first of its kind for Masorti in Israel, giving hands-on training to rabbinical students. And we are so proud that this program, which continues to today, has trained many of the leading rabbis in Israel today, including our own Rabbi Dikla Druckmann-Schurzer, who is the current rabbi at Magen Avraham. She was trained there when she was a rabbinical student as well. In addition to the rabbinic intern program, we've supported the building of 2 bomb shelters at Magen Avraham. The smaller one sufficed for a while, but then as the after-school program at Magen Avraham continued to grow, it wasn't large enough to protect all the children in the program. And so our congregation helped support the building of a much larger bomb shelter. And that bomb shelter holds 100 adults, which is more than enough to take care of the 100 or so children who belong to the after-school program at Magen Avraham. And lastly, many of our congregants helped support a new playground that was built at Magen Avraham that was just opened this winter. And they're very proud of the new playgrounds. It's affiliated with the after-school program, and the kids are loving it. Now, with all these important connections with the congregation, it almost goes without saying that we were treated like royalty when we came to Omer to stay with them. Visitors from the U.S., by the way, are always welcomed at Masorti synagogues. They love to see us. They know how important our support is to them. So anytime you're in Israel, I encourage you to check out your local Masorti Kehillah if you can. But we truly were treated like royalty this weekend. It started with Kabbalat Shabbat. When we sang Lahadodi, the congregation had planned a special welcome for us. And that was with each stanza of Lahadodi, they asked some group in the congregation to rise so that we could see each other. So for instance, the first stanza, anyone wearing white was supposed to stand as we sang the first stanza. Now, you may know that in Israel, wearing white on Shabbat is a custom. So there were a number of people who stood up for the first stanza. The second stanza was anyone who was born in Israel was supposed to stand up. Now, it may come as a surprise to some of you, but not to those of us who know Masorti, that Masorti is majority Israeli today. So the vast majority of the people in the congregation stood up when it asked for those who were born in Israel. The next stanza asked for native English speakers to stand. So the four of us from Adath Yeshurun stood, as well as some of the older members of the congregation who were the people who founded Magen Avraham. They're still very actively involved in the congregation, but they, like us, form a minority. English speakers are a minority in the congregation. The next stanza was for all those who joined the Kehillah because they had a simcha, a wedding or a bat or a bar mitzvah. Again, the majority of the congregation stood up, including the many boys and girls who are preparing for their b'nai mitzvah right now in the congregation. Those who are involved in Masorti leadership got the fifth stanza, and it was wonderful to see, for me to see who else in the congregation was involved, not only with Masorti nationally, but also involved with Masorti in their own congregation. And lastly, the TGIF stanza was anyone who was happy to be there welcoming Shabbat was to stand up in the last stanza of Lahadodi. So it was a beautiful welcome and a wonderful way for us to meet one another. The next welcoming was that Hazan Dulkin not only gave the sermon, which I talked about in the first video, but she and Rabbi Dikla sang together often during Kabbalat Shabbat and on Shabbat morning. Now, Magen Avraham is very fortunate to have a rabbi who is a vocalist as well as a wonderful rabbi, and she leads prayers often for the congregation. When she and Cantor or Hazan Joanna sang together, it was like a combination of Simon and Garfunkel and Indigo Girls put together. They sounded and looked like they're going to take it on the road right after services ended. Amazing. It was a real gift to all of us to hear them sing together. And I should add that Rabbi Dikla's baby daughter is also training to be a singer, and she trills along in her baby carriage. It was amazing to see that leaving Shabbat that morning, Shabbat services, to hear the baby singing along with her mother. The welcome continued on Shabbat morning when each one of us from Adath Yeshurun congregation was given an aliyah to the Torah. Now, getting an aliyah is always an honor, as any of us at Adath knows. But to be given this honor at our sister congregation, it really meant a great deal to all of us. And we were each given a separate aliyah. It wasn't like we were all honored as a group. We were each given our own aliyah that morning. And when you think about it, we took up half the aliyot at the Kehillah that morning. So really sincerely honoring us in that way. But as I went up for my aliyah, I also thought about how special this honor was in Israel generally. I was wondering how many women were being called to the Torah with the aliyah honor in Israel. Of course, we know this would only be Masorti and Reform congregations that would have such an honor for women. So I knew this was not only a great honor at Magen Avraham, it was a great honor in Israel to be able to have an aliyah on Shabbat morning. The people at the congregation were so sweet, and they were constantly telling us where we were in the Siddur. Now, why did they feel compelled to show us where we were in the Siddur? They have a completely different Siddur in Masorti congregations. Masorti has published its own Siddur, which became a bestseller in Israel. Yes, it contains all the traditional prayers that we are familiar with, but it also contains commentary and poetry and other prayers added in the margins and on the bottom of the pages to make it a contemporary reference for Israelis and native Hebrew speakers. It is only published in the Hebrew language, which is why they were helping all of us to find our way. Now you may ask, why would a Siddur become a bestseller in Israel? And Masorti was even surprised after the publication that it sold so well. But we know now, I think, a little bit better why this might have happened, because in the recent Rising Streams report, which did a poll of religion in Israel, and was published last year, they found that 800,000 Israelis identify as either Reform or Masorti. In other words, they support religious pluralistic practices in Judaism. Now that's a much higher number, I think, than anyone expected. And it shows why there would be certainly an audience for an egalitarian Masorti Siddur. I want to add that that 800,000 number is close to 10% of the population of Israel. And it's very close in number to the number of people who identify as Haredi, which is truly food for thought. In addition, we know that from the same Rising Streams report, we know about 25%, a quarter of all Israelis have participated in a Masorti or Reform service. Now, what have these services been? They've been weddings, they've been bat and bar mitzvahs, and they've been bat and bar mitzvahs for our children with special needs, the program I talked about in the previous video. There's the other thing we found out is that of that 25%, the majority identify as Orthodox. So you can see our outreach is really, really expanding through all different layers of Israeli society. That's another reason I think that the Siddur became a bestseller. There are a lot of people who are at least Masorti curious. The final reason is that I think people are longing for a rich, spiritually Jewish content that is egalitarian, and that this prayer book certainly contains that. So you can see an example of the Masorti Siddur in the PowerPoint. I have one in my possession if you are ever interested in taking a look at what the Masorti Siddur looks like, or you can purchase one off the Masorti Foundation website if you really want to have one in your own home. The final step in our visit was a Havdalah with the young leadership of the congregation. And I was so grateful that they gathered all of us together to talk with one another. It gave me the opportunity to ask what I always like to ask Israelis that I meet on my Masorti visits, and that is, what brought you to Masorti, and why did you stay? Why did you continue, and what brought you to become a leader in your congregation? I want to tell one story, which is about the president of Magen Avraham, Gal Heiken is his name, and Gal gave me permission to share the story with you. Gal's story, I think, is typical of many Israelis who join the Masorti movement. So Gal grew up in Omer. He was from a secular family, and he served in the IDF for many years. Gal is a psychologist, and he specializes in PTSD. He recently retired from IDF service and started private practice in Omer. He and his wife enrolled their children in that after-school program that I've talked about in Magen Avraham, which is considered the best after-school, aftercare program in Omer. So they enrolled their kids in the program, and that's how they got to know about the synagogue. Gal describes that during his IDF service, he went on a trip to Poland with a group of other IDF officers and soldiers. And they went to a community in Poland where Gal's great-grandfather was buried. They visited the cemetery of Gal's great-grandfather. Why? It turns out that Gal's great-grandfather was a prominent rabbi in Poland, and he was buried in the cemetery. And so Gal and the entire crew were there, and Gal said he was filled with embarrassment when he approached his grandfather's grave because he didn't know how to say Kaddish. Someone else had to lead him in Kaddish. He did not have enough Jewish background or Jewish education to say it for himself. He said he was also filled with sadness to know that in 4 generations, his family had gone from a prominent rabbinic family to a family that knew very, very little about Judaism at all. When it came time for Gal's oldest child, his son, to have a bar mitzvah, the family turned to Magen Avraham, a place that they were already familiar with from the aftercare program. And while they thought what they were going to get was training for their son to have his bar mitzvah, in fact, what they received was a warm welcome and lots of family education. This is something that our Masorti synagogues really specialize in because of the number of secular families who find their way to our doorsteps and just want to learn more. So Gal's family attended services regularly. They took classes to learn more about Kehillah, prayers, about the Torah, about holidays and ritual practices that they were not as familiar with. They found other families in the congregation whose children were also going through the Bat and Bar Mitzvah program. They became friends. There was bonding. They started attending services together and holding Shabbat dinners together. And lo and behold, Gal's daughters also had their bat mitzvahs at the congregation, and Gal became its president. This was a story we heard again and again from the young leadership of the congregation, their connection to the synagogue through the aftercare program, their involvement in bat or bar mitzvah there, and then how they had been welcomed as families, how they connected, how they made friends, and how they joined leadership to assure the success of the congregation. They shared with us their successes and challenges. Their successes included this aftercare program, which is so popular in Omer that its slate of openings fills immediately. As soon as a child is able to enroll, they do so. They were very proud of the playground that they built with our help and Adath Yeshurun. This was the first fundraising endeavor for many of these young leaders. They were really proud that this was the imprint that they're placing on Magen Avraham, is that they have contributed this playground, which will be in use for many years. They're also very proud of their outreach to their Muslim, Bedouin, and Christian neighbors in the greater Beersheba area. And as a source of a real interest for us as well. We wanted to hear more about it. There wasn't time, but I hope we can learn more from them about that outreach that they are doing. Their challenges were not so different in some ways from the challenges that we face as conservative Jews in the United States. One was how to keep teens engaged after their bat or bar mitzvahs if children are not enrolled in the Noam program. Also, how to keep their families engaged after the last child finishes their simcha at the congregation. Fortunately, we had Risa Kessler, our expert, who was able to share with them many, many pieces of advice about what Adath does to try to continue engagement through all stages of learning and life and our congregation. They also face challenges for recruiting new members and for getting the word out about what a Masorti congregation is and what it has to offer to the community. I chose to focus only on Magen Avraham today, but I want you to know that Magen Avraham is just one of 87 Masorti Kehillot in Israel, and they can be found from the north of Israel to the south of Israel, from along the Mediterranean Sea to Jerusalem, where we have a number of congregations, and really everywhere in between. The root of the word Masorti is the word Masur, which means to hand over or to give away. And we really experienced this blessing on Friday night at Kabbalat Shabbat services in Magen Avraham. They have a ritual at the end of services where 4 adults hold up a tallis, and all the children in the congregation are invited to come forward and stand under the chuppah that is formed by the tallis, and they receive the blessing of the children. Rabbi Dikla went around and she touched each child individually on the head as the congregation sang the prayer for blessing of the children. That prayer was, of course, sung in Hebrew in their congregation. I want to share it with you for tonight with your children. May God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you, fill you with grace. May God's face look upon you and fill you with peace. I have to say at this moment in Kabbalat Shabbat, I had been in Israel for 2 weeks, both on the Soul Sisters trip and doing Masorti mission, Masorti work. I found that this was the first time that I really felt homesick. And it was because I really missed my kids, who I am able to bless either virtually or in person every Friday night. And I missed that opportunity to place my hands on their heads and to wish them personally a blessing on the eve of Shabbat. In good times and bad times, our Kehillot and our rabbis are there to hand over the blessings of Masorti Judaism, and they do so inclusively. They give a blessing equally to men and to women, to boys and girls, to members of the LGBTQ community, to families and children with disabilities. They give it equally to people who are born to Judaism and to people who choose Judaism, like myself. We know from the Rising Streams report that literally hundreds of thousands of Israelis are craving what our Masorti synagogues offer, and that is renewal in the spiritual lives for themselves and for their children. Our rabbis and our Kehillot stand ready to reach out, to hand over those blessings of well-being, and they do so right now from a safe social distance and inclusively. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.